يا أهل الجنة إن ربكم تبارك وتعالى يستزيركم فحي على زيارته.
On, inshallah, from where we left off last week, which was still the chapter of Hayd. Before we do get into it, inshallah, if you can remember, we mentioned like the maximum purity between two Hayds, the maximum duration of Hayd, the minimum duration. We spoke a bit about nifas and so on, but then we left istihādah towards the end. We left istihādah towards the end. Just change this. Inshallah, if we do have connection issues, please let me know for those that are in on Zoom. Okay, so today inshallah we'll just be focusing, inshallah the lesson might not be as long as normal, but we'll just focus on Hayd, on istihādah, and a bit more into the blood that comes out of the woman and so on, and the rulings with regards to it. So last week we stopped by mentioning things that are forbidden. Okay, we spoke about things that were forbidden when it comes to a woman who is in the state of Hayd or nifas, these two. There are certain things that are forbidden for them. Okay, and these that we mentioned are number one. So the Musannif rahimahullah, he mentions وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ ثَمَانِيَةٌ. So there's these 8 things which are forbidden for the one who is in nifas or Hayd, the woman. Number 1 we said was salah. Number 2 we said was fasting, as-sawm. Number 3 we said was qira'atul Qur'an, which is reciting of the Qur'an. And we said we're going to touch a little bit more on this. I don't know if we'll have a lot of time to go into it, but inshallah I'll send something or I'll give something out with regards to this. Number 4, mashul mushaf wa hamluhu, so touching or carrying the Qur'an. Number 5 we said was dukhulul masjid, or entering the mosque or remaining therein. We'll touch more on that. Number 6 we said was at-tawaf, which is performing tawaf. Number 7 and 8 were al-wat'u, so having intercourse with one's wife, or wal-istimta'u bima bayna as-surrah wal-rukbah, so taking pleasure with what is between the navels and the knees. So just to touch on every one of these just individually quickly. Number 1, as-salah. Okay, all types of salah are forbidden. Okay, whether it's fard, whether it's nafal, whether it's sunnah, and according to the Shafi'ī madhab, because sajda tilawa, sajda sajda tilawa and sajda shukr, the sajda in itself is part of salah. Inshallah we'll get more into that when we get into the chapter of salah. As these are deemed to be part of salah, even these are forbidden for one in this state. Yeah, you can't even perform sajda shukr or sajda tilawa in this state. And then with regards to salah, one becomes pure. Just pull this out. When one becomes pure before the exiting of the salah, sorry, my notes mixed up. Okay, now, so when one becomes pure before the exiting time of salah, one has to repeat that prayer. Okay, one has to repeat that prayer. And before the exiting of salah, over here we mean even if there's just enough time for one to do takbiratul ihram and you became pure, that salah is a must for you to repeat that prayer. So for example, someone about 5 minutes before Asr finishes, they become pure, that salah becomes qadha on them and they must repeat that prayer. Khair. I hope that's clear for everyone. And then one, according to our madhab, and it's not just our madhab, according to a lot of the salaf, and just to quote a few of the salaf over here, one has to repeat the prayer previous to it as well. So if, for example, they became pure during Asr time, they have to repeat Dhuhr as well. And if it's Isha, they have to repeat Maghrib as well. And this is Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, the great Hanbali scholar. He mentions in his work Al-Mughni, he just mentions a few names which will be good to mention for some, because I know this might be a ruling where some probably don't agree with, or there's ikhtilaf and so on, but he says that this has been narrated from Abdurrahman ibn Auf, وابن عباس وطاووس ومجاهد وإبراهيم النخعي والزهري وربيعة ومالك والليث والشافعي وإسحاق وأبي ثور and Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. He says that, and the general masses of the tabi'in, this is what they say. They have to repeat the prayer before it. But of course there is ikhtilaf where it's mentioned that Hassan, I think it's Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah, he himself only says that, no, you only repeat that prayer that you've missed. You don't repeat the other prayer because it wasn't wajib upon you. Okay, so next point is, one must repeat the salah if one starts hayd after the beginning of the prayer time. Again, let me repeat. One must repeat a salah if one starts hayd after the beginning of the prayer time. So I'll give an example. Asr comes in, and then you still don't pray right at the beginning of Asr. 30 minutes later, you enter into the state of hayd or into the state of nifas. You have to repeat that prayer. Okay, you have to repeat that prayer. And likewise, so from this the opposite is understood. And if the salah time enters and there wasn't enough time for you to clean yourself, to perform wudu and to perform the prayer, so say just literally 3 minutes into the salah time, your hayd begins, that salah you do not have to repeat. Yeah, so I'm going to repeat that point again. If a salah time enters and there is enough time for you to clean yourself, perform wudu and pray the salah, but you don't, the salah is wajib. It becomes qada for you and you have to repeat it. Whereas if the salah enters and you don't have enough time to do that, then you do not have to perform qada of that salah. You see, this is very different to when one becomes pure just before the exiting time of salah. So if we look at point 2, we said that if one becomes pure before the exiting time, meaning just enough time for one to say the takbiratul ihram, you're not given time for about purifying yourself and all of this. This is not included in there. Just enough time for you to say Allahu Akbar, you have to repeat that prayer. Whereas, in the contrary to that, the opposite way, if your hayd starts whilst at the beginning of a prayer, if you had enough time, then you would have to repeat it. If you didn't have enough time, you do not have to repeat it. And we just mentioned as to what is mentioned by enough time and so on. And the next thing that was forbidden is fasting. This is a consensus of the ummah. There's no ifs or buts. This is one of the points in deen where there's no ikhtilaf. Okay, and this is known from the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she mentions, to the nearest meaning, she says, we used to be ordered, so during the days of hayd, we used to be ordered to repeat our fasting, but not our salah. Okay, we used to be ordered to repeat our fasting, but not our salah. And the scholars, they say, of course, if they were told to repeat their fasting, it means that they did not fast, and they didn't have to fast during the time of hayd. Next was the reciting of Al-Quran. Again, I said I wasn't going to go too deep into this because the ulama have gone extremely deep into this. And alhamdulillah, I myself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the tawfiq. I've written a short work with regards to the haid reciting the Quran. Inshallah, I'll speak to some of the brothers, probably be able to post it out on the group, Instagram, or if they could post it on YouTube. Once we upload this video, people will be able to download the PDF file to it, inshallah. So, with regards to reciting of the Quran over here, we've only got two points. which is that this ruling was well known amongst the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. Okay, this was well known amongst them and there was no khilaf. And when the ulama say there is no khilaf in a matter, when it was known, this is a sort of ijma'. This is a sort of consensus, or the scholars are in agreement to this ruling itself. Naam.
What about reciting Ayatul Kursi before you go to sleep?
Good question. Reciting of the Quran, it means reciting verses with the intention of reciting Quran. So if certain verses are like, for example, like those, Ayatul Kursi or the Mu'awwadatain and so on, you're reciting these as Quran, isn't it? Yeah, or some do it as dhikr. So the ulama, they say if someone recites it with the intention of adhkar, like your daily adhkar, for example, someone wants to go in the car and you recite part of the verse, Subhanalladhi sakhara lana hadha ma kunna lahu muqrinin wa inna ila rabbina lamunqalibun. That's part of the Quran, isn't it? And certain things like that, if it's done with the intention of daily adhkar, then there's no harm in that. There's no problem with that. Yeah, so with reciting the Quran, and with regards to reciting the Quran, it means when one recites, it's the moving of the lips. Reciting is the moving of the lips. So if one recites to themselves in their heart without moving of the lips, so for example, if you're listening to your Quran and you're just inside your heart, inside your mind, you're reading, this is perfectly fine. There's no khilaf in this. There is complete ijma' in this. So the sisters were probably thinking right now, what about if I'm doing hifz and my hayd is come, how am I going to do my hayd? I'm going to forget. No, you won't forget. Usually a woman, hayd lasts for 7 days, 6-7 days. Yeah, and if you're a Hanafi, the most it will last anyway is 10 days. And according to Shafi'ī, we said most is 15 days. Constantly listening to this and just revising it in your mind and so on, this will allow you to strengthen your hifz as well. You will not forget. So again, like I said, inshallah, we will have a PDF go around regarding this matter itself. And then the next point which was forbidden, we said, was touching or carrying the Quran. And this again, just one point is sufficient. There are other ahadith with regards to this, but we know the Prophet ﷺ, the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where he says, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, and the ulama have said this is referring to the Quran, that none touches it except those who are pure. And obviously it means those who are pure and not in the state of janaba. But you have some scholars that say no, this talks about the book or the Quran in Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, and it's talking about those who are mutahharun, it's talking about the angels. Because the verse before, if I can remember correctly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, fi kitabin maknoon, in a tablet well preserved, la yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun, tablet well preserved, they said it's talking about the Quran in Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is in the heavens. And لا يمسه إلا المطهرون means only the angels can touch this, and only they are the mutahharun, only they are the pure ones. And this is not talking about the humans touching the actual copy. That's why you have some ulama, they say, oh no, even if you don't have wudu, for example, you can touch the Quran and so on. But obviously, according to the majority of the scholars, the correct opinion, or the more correct opinion, is that they are not allowed to touch the Quran without wudu. And obviously if someone is in the state of janaba, is even more so, they're not supposed to. And the answer given to those who say that this is talking about the Quran, those who say this is talking about the Quran in Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, we say they mentioned the verse previous to that, right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, fi kitabin maknoon, in a well-preserved tablet, la yamassuhu illa al-mutahharun refers to that. But then if we look at the verse that comes after this, tanzilun min rabbil alameen, and we know the copy of the Quran that we have now is what has been sent down to us. Yeah, so Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he answers this very well, and he says, we know very well the verse after refers to the Quran we have at present in front of us, and that verse is talking about that, which means you cannot touch the Quran. Khair. And with regards to touching, I know there is a lot of some ulama, they go into more depth. They say that for example, the Ahnaf, they say if there is a cover on the Quran with which it can be separated, then there's no problem with holding the Quran like that. So for example, a lot of, if you go to madrasa and so on, maktab, you'll find that they have, all the kids, they have covers on the Quran, all of it. And these covers can be removed. So basically, if you don't have wudu, according to the Ahnaf, they say you can touch and carry the Quran. But obviously, even according to Shafi'ī, for like students like that, and due to hardship and so on, there is leniency in that. Okay, khair. And inshallah, I think the Musannif, he talks about this at the end, which probably next week we'll just touch up on to finish the chapter. So the next point is entering the masjid. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, he says, this is part of the hadith, I just took out the most important part. He says, I do not permit the mosque for a menstruating woman or for one who is in the state of ritual impurity, meaning the one in the state of janaba. Okay, the one who is in the state of janaba or the woman who is menstruating, they are not permitted to remain in the masjid. And this is mainly due to the possibility of them staining the masjid and so on, which is to be prevented. I know there's some ulama, obviously there's a slight khilaf in here as well, because the Prophet ﷺ, there are certain narrations where he sent some of his wives to get certain things from the masjid whilst they were in the state of menstruation and so on. So the ulama, they say that because of these ahadith, and in order to reconcile, as they are all authentic, if they don't fear that they will just dirty the masjid, dirty the carpet, then if it's a matter of just quickly going past and going by and so on, then there is somewhat is no problem, but it's better to refrain from such acts. And then we mentioned at-tawaf, another basic one, where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions in a hadith that tawaf around the house is like prayer, except that you speak. So whoever speaks does not speak anything but good. The main part that we want of this hadith on the topic that we're on is tawaf around the Kaaba is like prayer. This is why when you go to the Haram, into Masjid al-Haram, instead of praying Tahiyatul Masjid 2 rak'ah, performing tawaf once is basically the tahiyat of that masjid, the welcome of that masjid, yeah? So you go around there once. When I say once, I mean you complete the 7 circles of the tawaf. Yeah, and because it's like prayer, the same ruling will apply as to salah, and we mentioned before, it is not permissible for them. Next, intercourse with one wife. This is getting clear from the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he mentions in Surah Baqarah, I can remember the Arabic, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, the people, they asked the Prophet ﷺ about hayd. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gives the answer here, saying أَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ, and they ask you with regards to the women menstruating. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, then give them this answer, قُلْ هُوَ أَذَى فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءِ, say it is, basically this menstruating is harm, or is najasa, or is dirty. فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ, then stay away from women during menstruation. Stay away from women during menstruation. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rest of us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. So Allah, he says, and do not approach them, meaning do not approach the women. And the ulama have said this means do not have intercourse with them until they have cleansed themselves. And when they have cleansed themselves, then go to them as Allah has commanded you to do so. And indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who often repent to Him, and those who are pure, or those who love to pure themselves. Khair. And now the last one, which was taking pleasure from one's wife between the navel and knees. Of course, this is when they are in the state of menstruation. There's a hadith again that one of the companions, they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what am I permitted to do? What's permissible for me to do with my wife while she's in the state of menstruation? Of course, I can't sleep with her and so on. What can I do? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, to the nearest meaning of the hadith, he said, you have what is above the lower garment. And the ulama, they said, from this hadith, you have what is above the lower garment. It means the lower garment where it's normally tied is from the navel to the knees. That's where it's normally tied. Yeah? So anything in between, anything above that or anything below the knees and so on is jaiz from this hadith. طيب, so these are the adillah with regards to the things prohibited for the woman in the state of hayd. طيب, now we said hayd. Last week we didn't mention that according to the Shafi'iyya, all types of colors every single type of color from discharge of women is considered to be hayd. Okay, it's considered to be hayd because women, the blood comes in or the dirt comes in many different colors. Yeah, and from these starting from the strengths of these is black being, of course, the strongest or the highest in terms of strength, and then red, and then you have light red, you've got yellow, and you've got somewhat brownish color. So all of these are considered hayd according to our madhab, and the proof that we use for this is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she used to say that the women used to bring her like cotton, which they used to use, of course, during the time of hayd, and they wanted to know, has my hayd finished or has it not finished, am I clean now, and so on. Aisha radiallahu anha used to tell them, don't haste, don't be so haste, don't rush until you see pure liquid or clean liquid, or you could say see-through liquid, or until you see nothing. So until nothing comes out basically, or until nothing comes out, just take it as its hayd. That's why according to us, we say all of this is will fall under the category of hayd if one sees it during days in which it is possible for them to be in hayd. طيب. So we said minimum purity between two hayds is 15 days. We mentioned that last week. Yeah, the minimum purity between two hayd is 15 days. And actually before I think I've got a few examples here. Last week we mentioned with regards to the pregnant woman, we said that according to our madhab, it is possible for the pregnant woman to actually release blood which will be considered or which can be considered as hayd. Now, according to the madhab, this is the qawl al-jadid of Imam al-Shafi'i, meaning when he went to Misr, this is the qawl he had. But qawl al-qadim, he says that no, the pregnant woman cannot actually experience hayd during that time. And obviously, nowadays we see a lot of the ulama, many of the ulama, they say that it's extremely rare that a woman who is pregnant will release discharge, any form of discharge in terms of blood and so on. And obviously because the whole point of the womb, when a woman is in hayd, blood comes from the furthest part of the womb. Now, the womb, sorry. And when they become pregnant, of course, the womb is totally in use right now, one can say. Yeah, and of course, that is in developing of the baby, so it's not possible for one to actually bleed. So, we said 15 days is minimum. Now, I've got 4 examples here. I want to ask questions. Okay, so I could probably try to zoom in on that. So we have first example, days, someone bleeds from day 1 to day 3, so 3 days of bleeding, and then day 4 to day 9, they are pure, they are clean. But then on day 10, they bleed. Who can tell me what the ruling of this will be? What will this be? Will it all be hayd? Will part of it be hayd? Will it all be istihādah? Will part of it be istihādah? And so on. Anyone even in the church? So again, they bleed for the first 3 days and then they remain pure for the next 5 days and then they bleed on day 10. Okay, anyone that can work it out? So minimum purity between the two bleeding has to be 15 days. Correct. Minimum bleeding has to be, someone mentioned here, asking a question, minimum bleeding has to be 15 days. That's correct. Now this whole period, what is it going to be classed as? It's very important that we understand these. Okay, I'll give an extra 10 seconds to see if anyone can answer.
This would be one hayd, is it?
The whole thing, yeah?
Yeah.
Because?
Because the minimum time between 12 and 15, the time between these is 5 days.
Jazakallah khair. That's correct. Yeah, so the brother has answered that the whole cycle will be considered as hayd. The whole cycle will be considered as hayd because the bleeding is still within 15 days. Remember last week we said maximum bleeding is 15 days. And the minimum purity between these two haids has to be 15 days, and we don't have 15 days here. It's only 5 days. And because this bleeding has all happened within the 15 days, everything here will be considered as hayd, which means that, of course, the sister would have stopped praying, reading Quran and so on days 1 to 3. But then when she hits day 4 and 9, when she hits day 4, ideally what she's meant to do is to clean herself because she can see she's pure and do whatever she has to do, whether it's fasting, praying salah and so on. But then on day 10 she bleeds. Then with that she understands, or she comes to realize that, oh, okay, from day 4 to day 9, I shouldn't have prayed. I shouldn't have fasted and so on. And if this was in Ramadan, for example, the fasts that she did between day 4 and day 9 will have to be repeated because she was in the state of hayd. I hope that's clear. Second example. Someone bled, okay, the sister bleeds. This is for example purposes, we give the sister's name as Aisha. Yeah, so we say Aisha bleeds 6 hours. Okay? 6 hours of the first day. And then on the second day to the fourth day, she's pure. Second day to the fourth day, she's pure. And then on day 5, she bleeds for 10 hours. What will this ruling be?
6 hours.
Yeah, so she bleeds for 6 hours to begin with.
Oh, this is not hayd.
What will this be?
Because I remember you saying that it has to be a minimum of 24 hours.
Barakallahu feek. Correct. So I would want some of the people on Zoom to answer as well, but the answer has been given. The whole thing, the whole example here will be classed as istihādah because the sister, in this case Aisha, has not reached a total of 24 hours of bleeding. So if you can remember, we said minimum hayd has to be 24 hours, whether it's just consistent or continuing bleeding, or even if there is spotting and so on, that adds up to 24 hours. Good. Next example. Aisha bleeds from day 1 to day 7. And then from day 8 to day 15, she is pure. And then she bleeds on day 16 and day 17. Again, so Aisha bleeds from day 1 to day 7. And then from 8 to 15 she's pure, and then 16 and 17 she bleeds again. What's the ruling of this? Let's see if you can work it out. I'll give you a few more seconds. So I'll repeat. Day 1 to 7, Aisha bleeds. Day 8 to 15, she's pure. And then day 16 and 17, she bleeds again. What will this be calculated as? Would it all be hayd? Will part of it be hayd? Would it all be istihādah? Part of it istihādah, and so on. A few more seconds, then I'll give the answer. So I'll give the answer, inshallah. So in this scenario, days 1 to 7 will be considered as hayd. Days 1 to 7 will be considered as hayd. Days 8 to 15 will be considered as pure, as in purity. Yeah. The days 8 to 15 will be, as we said, purity. But then what happens to day 16, 17? Sorry, no one's answering here.
I think it's not a new one.
It's going to be a new one, yeah? It's not a new one. Because?
No, I don't know. Sorry.
I'll give a few more seconds, inshallah, get people thinking. Okay, I'll give the answer, inshallah, to this. So, okay, wait, someone's answered.
They said hayd.
Yeah, someone said hayd. What's hayd? All of it? Or just the first? Or the second batch? So day 16, 17, or days 1 to 7? Okay, I'll give the answer, inshallah, and then people can think on the next example. So the answer to this is, days 1 to 7 will be considered as hayd. And then from day 8 onwards will be considered as purity. So that means day 16 and day 17 will also be considered as someone who's in the state of istihādah. Because remember we said if day 1 to 7 was hayd, and the maximum duration of hayd is what? 15 days. Maximum duration is 15 days, which means anything after 15 days from the first time you've seen blood, anything after that can never be considered hayd. It will always be considered as istihādah if you're bleeding, or it will be time of purity. So in this case, from day 1 to day 7, they bled. And then from 8 to 15, they were pure. So that first 15-day period has been covered. So anything that comes after this cannot be considered as hayd, which means the blood on the 16th and the 17th would mean that it is istihādah, and the woman would have to, or Aisha in this case, would have to clean herself and pray as usual. Is that clear, yeah? Okay, last example, inshallah, on this one.
Okay, can I try?
Go on. Sorry? Yeah, go on.
Basically, I think it's the last 5 days that is considered hayd, from the day 25 to 30. Because day 1 to 10 is hayd, yeah, and then 15 days passes, and there hasn't been a sufficient another 15 days until the 25th.
That's good, mashallah. But then what about days 1 to 10? What's that?
No, day 1 to 10 is
Hayd.
yeah.
Okay. And then in the 18 to 30, only the last 5 days will be hayd again. That's correct.
Is it?
Yeah, mashallah. Very good. That's correct. So the last example, our brother is taking you out of your misery. Days 1 to 10, Aisha bleeds, and then 11 to 17 they're clean, but then they bleed again for another 12 days. From the 18th to the 30th they bleed. So in this scenario, days 1 to 10 will be considered as hayd, and then days 11 to 25 will be considered as tuhur, will be considered as pure, because we said there has to be a minimum of 15 days between two haids. And then the remaining 5 days over here, so from the 25th to the 30th, will be considered as hayd. It will be considered as hayd. That would be the new hayd. So basically that would mean that a woman, this sister here, Aisha, every 15 days of purity, the new hayd begins. So it's very important to know this, because a lot of rulings are tied on to this. So for example, a divorcee, a woman who is divorced and they've been given talaq and they need to stay 3 cycles of hayd. It's not 3 months, but it is 3 cycles. And if she, in this example, every 15 days a new hayd starts for them, then within like a month and a half, she could clear that time, or within 2 months and so on. Okay, khair. So those are the first examples. I hope everyone is still on track, inshallah. Okay, next is the purity between hayd and nifas. We've just got a few points over here with regards to hayd and nifas. If you can remember, let me see if I've got it down. If you can remember, okay, I think I didn't write it down again, but just a quick recap of what we did last week. The minimum duration for a woman to be considered in the state of nifas, remember, is just a lahza, just a moment. Even if they bleed for like 3-4 minutes, that could be classed as nifas. Okay, and we said, remember that nifas, this blood that comes out with giving birth, it is only classed as nifas after the baby is born. Okay, after the full baby is taken out, the blood which follows will be classed as hayd. And according to us, any blood that comes out during labor or with the delivery itself, this is not classed as hayd. This will be, so it's not classed as nifas, it will be classed as damul fasad. Okay, now we said that the general time, or the normal duration, one can say, or the general duration that women normally bleed for nifas is 40 days, and the maximum we said is 60 days. Now, what happens if a woman does not see blood within the first 15 days? Sometimes they might not see blood straight away. It could 5, 6, 7 days could go past and they don't see blood. Now, according to our madhab, for this blood to be classed as nifas, they have to bleed within the first 15 days. Okay, they must bleed within the first 15 days, because once they've given birth and then 16 days later they see blood, this will not be classed as nifas. This will go back to the normal of hayd. Okay, so again, I've mentioned here, if there is 15 plus days of purity in between at any given time, then they will be considered to be pure. I'll give an example over here. So this time I've started on the left, yeah. So days 1 to 10. Days 1 to 10, this woman who has given birth, again we use Aisha, she's given birth. She bleeds from day 1 to 10. And then days 11 to 26, she's pure. And then she bleeds on day 27 onwards. What will be classed as nifas here? What will be classed as hayd? Or what will be classed as purity? What will be classed as istihada? And so on, in this example. You know, what would be classed as, what would be hayd on this? Yeah, so 27 plus will be considered as hayd, and days 1 to 10 will be considered as nifas, because of course she was bleeding within the first 15 days. Okay, the second example, Aisha bled from day 1 to 50. And then from days 51 to 60, she was pure. And then from day 61, she bleeds again. What will be the ruling for this blood that she sees? All of it will be classed as nifas. Because why you're saying all of it will be classed as nifas because it's not 15 days of purity in between.
I don't know the ruling on the maximum days on the fast. I forgot the ruling.
60 days is maximum.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Then the 61 will be
Hayd.
No, it wouldn't be.
What would it be?
I know day 1 to 50 is in the fast, and then, but don't they need 61 is hayd.
61 is hayd.
Yeah.
But there's not 15 days of purity in between.
Okay, so it's all nifas.
But maximum of nifas is 60. So with this one, basically, days 1 to 50 will be nifas without any ikhtilaf. And then once they hit the maximum 60 days, even if there isn't 15 days of purity in between, whatever comes after will be hayd, because you've reached the maximum of 60 days. Yeah, so because you've reached the maximum of 60 days, whatever comes after will be classed as hayd. So in this example, 1 to 50 is nifas, 61 will be hayd, and 61 and above will be hayd or nifas, or istihādah and so on. طيب. Now, we are at istihādah. How long are we going? Okay, so istihādah, how long are we into the lesson? So now, we'll do what we can inshallah for the next 10 minutes or so with regards to istihādah. So, we said that istihādah, now before this, of course, we already spoke about hayd, and we've already spoken about an-nifas, and the third type of blood which comes out of a woman is dam al-istihādah, so the dam of istihādah. Now, so we said that it is blood which comes out on or in days other than of the days of hayd or the days of an-nifas. And with regards to istihādah, it will be like normal. Okay, spelling mistake there. You should say it will be like normal hadath, and one must clean themselves and perform wudu and carry on with their daily life. Okay, so but there are a few things which we need to touch on with regards to this. They need to perform wudu, and we say that, of course, we're speaking about the sisters here who is in the state of istihādah. They need to perform wudu for every salah. And if you can remember, we said this will be like the same example of someone who is in constant hadath. Someone who is in constant hadath, they have to perform wudu at every salah. There's certain conditions that they need to meet, or certain conditions they need to follow. And from these conditions, so if a mustahādah, so a woman who's in the state of istihādah, intends to pray, they must adhere to the following things. Number one, they have to clean themselves. Of course, when we say clean themselves, we're talking about cleaning their private parts and cleaning any part of their garment which may have been affected or which may have been made dirty due to the blood. They have to clean this place, because this blood, if you can remember, we said is najis. It is from the types of najasa which must be cleaned. That's point one. Point two is they must place a barrier. And when we say place a barrier in between, over here we can understand nowadays we have pads and so on. where once they've cleaned themselves, they'll place a barrier between the private parts and the clothing, so it does not make their clothes or their garments dirty. Now, a side note, obviously, even within the days of our Salaf and so on, they used to do something, they used to use cotton, which is called, nowadays they call it a cotton ball test. What the women would do is, they would insert a certain amount of cotton whilst they are in the state of bleeding, or whilst they're in the state of istihada, and then they would use this to have a look at if they've stopped bleeding, or has their strength and the quality of the blood changed, and so on. Now, our day to day, we have, of course, the sanitary pads and so on, which most women or sisters use, but then we have tampons as well. Now, with regards to tampons, I think it's important that we do mention it now, is that whoever uses tampons, one thing they need to remember is it should not cause any harm. Number 2 is it should not be used during the time of Ramadan. So when one is fasting, and it doesn't even have to be in Ramadan, when one has a sawm, when someone is fasting, whether it's sunnah, nafal, fard, wajib, nadar and the likes, they are not permitted to use a tampon, because anything which is inserted in the private parts, it does break one's fast. So one should not use that when fasting. And number 3 is they must be in need of it. Okay, they must be in need of it, but of course we know it's safer and it's sufficient for sisters to use sanitary pads and so on, because they do the job very well. So that's the second point, where you have to place a barrier in between. Third point is, you have to do wudu after the time of salah enters. Time of salah must have entered before you perform your wudu. So for example, dhuhr comes in at 12:30, you cannot go and do wudu at 12:20 and say, I'm just going to do wudu now and wait for dhuhr to come in, or as soon as dhuhr comes in, I'm going to pray. That wudu is not valid, because performing wudu during this time, of course, is due to cause of darura, and darura can only be, or darura will only be considered when the act comes in, or when the time comes in, and so on. And in this case, we have salah entering. Next point we have is the continuity of acts. And what is meant by this, what is meant by the continuity of acts is that once salah time enters and you want to go and get ready for salah, when you clean yourself, placing the barrier in between, whether you're going to use the pad and so on, you perform wudu, and then you dress yourself properly, and then you go and perform salah, etc. These should all happen straight after one another. You shouldn't just go and clean yourself and then wear a pad and then wait 20 minutes, for example, and then go and perform wudu and then wait another 20 minutes and perform salah. This is not permissible. They have to be following one after the other. So I hope that's clear. One after the other. So going back to here, so these points are very, very important. And just to repeat, that you need to perform wudu for every single fard prayer. Every single fard prayer you must perform wudu. There's no ifs or buts. Once salah comes in, you must perform wudu, and for every fard prayer you must perform wudu, but you can perform as many nawafil as you would like with that one wudu. And this is a bit like, if you can remember when we done at-tayammum, where when you do tayammum and so on, you can only perform one fard prayer, but as many sunan as you would like. It is the same as the mustahada when she intends to perform as-salah. Okay, so we're in Tayyib. Now, the next point, Next point we have is, inshallah, I'll probably do list these next points, and inshallah we might stop over here and carry on next week. So now if one bleeds, or if one's bleeding exceeds 15 days, if one's bleeding exceeds 15 days, then they will fall into one of these 7 categories. Now these 7 categories in which the sisters are categorized in, depending on the type of blood, or the blood they see when they bleed, and so on. Now these 7 are, number 1, in Arabic it is known as, or they would be known as المبتدأة المميزة, the beginner who can distinguish, meaning they can distinguish blood, the blood that comes out. So this will be the first time the blood comes out. Inshallah, we'll touch on every single one of them and mention a few points individually. And then the second type is المبتدأة غير المميزة, the beginner who cannot distinguish. They cannot distinguish between the type of blood which they've just seen. And then number 3, it would be المعتادة المميزة, one who has a habit and they can distinguish the types of blood which they are seeing. Okay, they can distinguish between the types of blood which they are seeing. The next category is contrary to that, المعتادة غير المميزة, so the one who has a habit but cannot distinguish. So they've seen their health before, maybe 10 years, they've been bleeding and so on, but they cannot distinguish between the type of blood. And inshallah we'll mention more on that, so we will have a better understanding. Next is المتحيرة المطلقة, one who is confused. Okay, one who is confused. So when we say confused, is they do not remember the time or the habit. They don't remember the time that of the month which they normally would bleed, or the habit that they used to have. Number 6 is المتحيرة الذاكرة للوقت الناسية للعدد. They are confused, but not as much as the first one, because they remember the time of the month which they would bleed. So for example, they'll remember, I know I used to bleed at the start of the month, of every month, and so on, but they don't remember how many days they would bleed, and so on. And the last one is contrary to number 6, so the opposite of number 6 is المتحيرة الذاكرة للعدد الناسية للوقت. They too are confused, but they remember the habit and not the time. Okay, they remember the habit but not the time. I'm thinking inshallah I think we'll stop there, and next week bi'idhnillahi ta'ala we will begin with explaining inshallah ta'ala every single one of these points, or every single one of these conditions which we have just mentioned, and give a few examples with regards to each, and what they can do and what they cannot do. And inshallah next week as well we will bi'idhnillahi ta'ala finish Kitāb ut-Tahārah, because we only have like maybe 2 or 3 lines left from what the author rahimahullah has mentioned himself. And then inshallah, if we have time next week, we will begin with Kitāb al-Salah. Are there any questions with regards to today's lesson? I think most questions will probably be coming in next week whilst we explain every single one of these 7 situations. So just to summarize, inshallah, the bare minimum of hayd, we said minimum duration of hayd is 1 day, meaning 24 hours. be it continuous bleeding or spotting that adds up to 24 hours. The maximum duration one can be in the state of hayd is 15 days, and the minimum duration of purity between two hayds is 15 days. So if in these 15 days, if someone sees blood, it will not be counted as hayd, and they will carry on as normal. And there is no maximum to the purity, because some women can go 3, 4, 5, 6 months and not see any blood, which is a norm for some. So khair, inshallah, if there are no questions, we'll stop there. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Inshallah, I'll see you all next week. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, we will finish the we'll finish the chapter of ut-Tahārah. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.